One. Hey guys, my name is Lauren Hollows from NOI Education Services. Welcome back for part 3 of our interview with the lovely Dr. Phil. In parts 1 and 2, we have talked about the Defence Force, the history of it. It was really interesting, so do go back and check that out if you haven't already watched them. And in part 2, we talked on thoughts on where the vet sector is now and got onto an awesome tangent about the joys of training packages. But now I would like to talk about the cycle of vet regulation. So I've been in vet for 17 years now. In 2009 was the first time that I saw this massive swing from regulate quality in the sector to headlines, vet sector bad, colleges shutting down, mass re-registrations. And that was my first encounter with this. And it scared the heck out of me the first time it happened. I then saw it all again in 2015-16 with the massive vet fee help scandals. And again, hitting the front pages, RTOs, dodgy, RTOs bad, et cetera, et cetera. Fortunately, now in 2024, I think 7 years later again, it seems to be a 7-year cycle from what I've experienced. We're seeing it again. We're seeing dodgy RTOs. We're seeing, cut all of the student visas. We're seeing, I think there was 152 RTOs that lost their registration yesterday because they, had not provided training in the previous 12 months. So, I mean, not really any loss there, let's be honest. But, I would expect to see again, August 1st, that we'll see another round of mass cutoffs because RTOs haven't paid their registration fees. This kind of cycle of RTOs, savior, of the education sector versus RTOs, terrible RTOs, shut them all down, everyone's dodgy. It does seem to happen kind of on what seems to be like a 7-year cycle. At least that's what I've seen in the last 17 years. How do we, and I know part of this is obviously, thinking about what you said already about regulation and being able to tailor regulation to really focus on quality. But how do we, for those of us that are we do see all of the amazing things that happen in our sector, and I've never seen a headline of, private RTO does amazing work with, this particular group of students, but I know it happens, I know so many RTOs that do these incredible projects in health and in schools and in automotive industry, to get people's skills and make life changes. The whole reason I'm in vet is because from the very first group of students that I worked with, I saw the change that it made in their lives. And I went, I just don't see that happening anywhere as clearly as I see it in the vet sector. But we've been incredibly poor on messaging that. And anytime it does seem to come out, it only ever comes out about TAFE, and TAFE does some amazing work. I'm not going to take this up, I'm not taking this as an opportunity to rip on TAFE, but the vet sector does beautiful, amazing things. And we seem to be really poor about the changes that we can make in people's lives. So how do you, what are your thoughts on all of that, and how can we be more effective messengers for the life-changing things that we can and do in vet?
That's a great question, a really good question. And I need to preface my response by saying I've not been an RTO. I've never been an RTO. The company I currently work for is an RTO for certain courses, but I'm not part of that. So I've not been at the heart of RTO-ship from that point of view, but I have been a very, very interested observer. Someone who's been around the traps a few times. I like to think that I invented the whole RTO system. And that goes way back in history. Back in the late 80s, I was the training manager for a group called Peter's Ice Cream in WA. massive company, and it was really big. But we had a food industry. We had a bakery, and we had another food standards group. You'll remember them out of Balcatta and places
Look,
like
my
that.
sons still love the Peter's vanilla ice cream is still their favorite. So
Absolutely, absolutely. But it wasn't a place to get cheap employees rates when you were a diabetic, so I couldn't take advantage of it. But at the time, we also had difficulties that some of the apprentices out of the bakery, or the parents, were coming to me and saying, Phil, look, our kids out there at the bakery, where they're running big machines, they're all computerized, they don't handle food stuff themselves. They take a big bag of flour, they pour this in, turn on a machine, all this other stuff goes in, they push a button, and out the end roll these 100,000 sausage rolls or whatever. The trouble is, they're going to TAFE and they're being examined on how to make fairy cakes. And they said that's a problem because they don't do that in the workplace. But they get their exam is around stuff that they don't even do during training. They're expected to learn that in the workplace. What can we do? Well, I spoke to the bakery guys. They said, well, we don't have time to train the apprentices on this stuff. So there needs to be a change somewhere in the system. I went and spoke to the College of Advanced Education at the time, but then became TAFE. They said, well, we can't do much because the curriculum comes to us from Department of Education and Training. I said, okay. So I went to the Department of Education and I spoke to their apprentice, the people who wrote the curriculum. And these guys were old bakers from 100 years ago. They're too old, too lazy, too broken to work. So now they're working in the government. And I said, how can we change the curriculum? They said, well, we can't change it because that's the way I did this as a young fella. That's the way it's going to be done in the future. So you're not going to change the curriculum for bakery apprentices. And they said, no. Okay, we're not going to send our apprentices to school anymore. And we went on strike. I was also the deputy chair of the Food Processing Industry Training Council in WA at the time as well too. And other people came in and said, well, we've got the same problems. Our apprentices are being trained on things that they are not being taught in the workplace, because the workplace is modern now. It's computerized. It's a mass manufacturing, and they're being taught on how to make these little tiny delicate things. They're being examined on how to make tiny delicate. So we went on strike. WA stopped sending the apprentices to the college. Next thing we know, the Premier, Mr. Burke at the time, suddenly rang up the department and said, what the hell's going on? What's going on here? So they called in another gentleman, and he's going to hate me because I've just forgotten his name off the top of my head. That's absolutely terrible. He was a great friend. They called him in and said, what can you do? And he said, well, we can reform the training system for apprentices. And he came up with a thing called NATAS, the National Apprenticeship Training and Assessment Scheme, which basically rewrote the rule book for apprentices in Australia. He said he called it that because it was Satan backwards. And he only saw the devils in this whole program. So between us, we argue as to who created the first VET models in Australia. I reckon it was me, he reckons it was him, but we don't care. The issue was that as far back as then, we were having problems with what the regulators were saying was going to happen and what was actually happening in the realities of the workplace. And we still see it today, only we are now at that level where we're actually regulating RTOs, because we heard about dodgy RTOs. Therefore, the RTO is a person, therefore we can regulate the RTO, forgetting there's people inside the RTO. Now, one thing we don't have in this country, and I've complained about it in defence as well, and I complained about it way back when I was at the National Training Board, is there's one function we do not have a training package for. One function, training manager. We have RTO manager. We don't have a training manager. Now, managing training is a big job. I've been a training manager often. I've run my own companies. It takes on far more than worrying about training package and qualifications. It is a huge job. You're worried about quality, about standards, about performance, about recruiting the right people, training the right people, advertising, marketing, getting out with your clients, all of those sorts of things, developing a product, maintaining the product, maintaining a vision for training in your community and your area. It's not just running training courses.
It's balancing operations, viability, quality,
Very
and
much so.
compliance.
Very much so.
I do a lot of mentoring in that space.
It's a link between the strategic management of an organization, strategic direction of the organization, and what the people do. It's that link. We don't have training managers. Military spends billions of dollars every year on training people. We train other armies. We've got people overseas at the moment training the Ukrainian army. We do not have a training manager. We've got officers who are appointed to take trainers away, but there's no one managing the training. Here's your training package, run the training package. Okay, but training is much bigger than that. It's a huge. When I was in the UAE, I was the director of operations for the largest vocational institute in the world, the IAT, Institute of Applied Technology. We had 5 senior secondary schools running vocational training. We had 4 colleges, vocational colleges, from introduction to nursing through nuclear science to aeronautics. We had a school, a whole army camp given to us for 800 students who were disaffected in the school environment. They didn't know what to do with them. So we had 800 students, and these kids were doing marvelous work, absolutely tremendous work, because they were focused on what they need to do to get a job as opposed to what they need to do to be qualified. We had 3 universities, and we're building another 2 when I left. I had a $220 million budget, my budget, to play with. We were focused on the community, on the families, on the environment, on the region. We were focused on the national economy. My focus was, and I said this very clearly, is that one day the UAE is going to run out of oil. Then what? You need other industries. And that's what my job was to do, to create a VET system that enabled these industries to grow and flourish and the nation to prosper and to live out to the future. I argue every single day that we should have the same process in this country, but we don't, because we have nobody managing it. VET in this country does not have a vision.
Has quite a good process around that. I really like Singapore's model for for training packages. Yeah, Singapore has got it's so to the point. Like, they've taken the best parts of several systems and they've really refined. Refined it quite well.
Yeah. When they opened the VT sector in the UAE, of course, TAFE came flooding in. Every state had their own representatives over there. They were pouring their own little models in. And I was pulling my hair out, because WA's TAFE system was different to New South Wales, was different to the Victorian system. They're saying, we've got the best system in the world. No, you have not. Go back in your box. You're not going to get to talk to the minister today, because he's aware of what you're up to. And he doesn't want you here, and you're going to lose your contract anyway. But that's beside the point. But we lent on the Singaporeans a lot. Singaporean was really good, and we exchanged people with them quite a lot. But getting back to my point, is that VET in this country does not have a vision. There is no strategic plan for VET in this country. There's no business model for it.
Yeah,
it's just an extension of TAFE.
And I mean, it's a shame, because it's currently like a $20 billion export with international education, and that's obviously a combination of higher education and vet. But I've worked on projects where we've brought people in from Saudi Arabia to learn how to set up a system for quality managing training in the food space. And I've seen so many of these amazing projects over time, and Australia can absolutely be a beacon for skills-based training.
We used to be. I went. These are the projects that I advise on. NCQA in New Zealand, the development of their VET system over there. They were purely qualifications based until we went out there and started talking about comms and all that sort of stuff. So they changed then. I don't know what it's doing now, because I haven't taken much notice of it. South Africa, wonderful woman by the name of Margaretha van Rooyen. I always remember this name, because it's such a lovely name. She came out, and I spent a lot of time with her, because they had the problems in South Africa. The country was opening up, and then suddenly all these people who were previously denied education and training opportunities were being given them. She said, what the hell do we do? So I helped them develop their assessment processes over there in South Africa. Mexico, USA, we spent a lot of time in the USA. Canada's done some wonderful things, not at the national level, but regional levels. They've done some tremendous stuff. Singapore, we were there in Singapore as well too. And a couple of other countries, I can't remember all of them. But the whole idea was around centering it on a model, a business model. Start the business model from there and work outwards. We've not got that. That's where the regulator has problems. They don't have a vision. They don't have a strategic plan. They don't have any kind of business model around which to ensure that what's going on across the whole VT sector is being aimed solely at meeting the national economic agenda. It's not. It's all about
We don't really
qualifications.
have a great national economic agenda, let's be honest.
No, we don't, which is sad. Right now, you can
We don't
see
have a very good plan.
we see hundreds of millions of dollars being poured into TAFE. Yes, where's that coming from? It's coming from people who would have been paid unemployment. Unemployment. It's taking people off the unemployment list, putting them into TAFE. That money's just being transferred across.
I mean, one of the things that I find really just frustrating is that, like, you know, if we looked at TAFE, for example, why does every single TAFE and almost every single campus within TAFE builds their own resources? And it's like, why would you not pool all of that nationally, create a base set of beautiful resources for everyone, which would save billions, right? And then allow the campuses to contextualize what is a great base. But no, everyone creates everything from scratch, and so much time and effort are wasted within government by doing things like that. And it's like, we don't have to spend, like, you know, we can spend our money in smarter ways and get a million times, like, get a million X outcome from that.
I saw this so often in the past, and don't hold me to it still being the case. But we'd go along to these high-level committee meetings, these high-level board meetings, and there'd be 10 members on there. One from each TAFE, union, an employer, and a bureaucrat. Now, who gets outvoted every time?
The employer.
The employer, and the bureaucrat's just there modelling it to the employer every single time. Because each of the TAFEs, each of the states want their own model, their own way. Look at Victoria, for example. Last time I looked, they had 3 different VT systems. They say we have a VT system in Australia. No, we don't. We have 7, a minimum 7 different VT systems.
Right, look at state funding models, that blows everything out of the water again, because
it should be national,
you know, the funding entirely dictates.
Yeah.
It dictates to such a large extent how the training has to occur. Particularly like durations and things like that, because so many of the states are like 50% of the nominal hours, 70% of the nominal hours. And it's like, what? Half the time, there is no logical link. You know, in WA, we've got a unit that requires 48 complete food service periods to be done, and it's 40 nominal hours. We've got another unit in the same training package that requires five complete food service periods to be done, and it has 160 nominal hours attached to it. It's like, what? Where's the rationale for that, guys? That makes no sense.
Well, you know how they determine nominal hours, don't you?
Roll the dice.
Yeah, that'll do. Nominal hours. When we were first developing training packages, someone spoke to me and said, "Well, how do we determine these nominal hours?" I said, "You can't, because each person is individual. So you're just going to kind of guess." And they say, "Okay, we'll guess. Yeah, it's going to take 5 weeks. Yeah, it's going to take 10 weeks. It's going to take this." So now we're locked into this nominal hours. Did you give that person their 100 hours? Well, they didn't need it.
Do you know what I mean? Like online, in a group, one-on-one, you know, like when I first started homeschooling my kids, you know, everyone was like, well, but how are you managing that? I'm like, because if I'm working one-on-one with a kid, I don't need 26 hours in a week to educate them, right? I can get all of that same curriculum at a better quality in 5 hours than I could if I was dealing with a group of 26 students, right? And so, you know, the number of students that you're dealing with, you know, dealing with, you know, a group of 26 versus a group of 15 versus a group of 3 entirely changes the rationale for the need for the number of hours and things like that. So I could do a 1 day a week class with a group of, you know, 8, or I could do 1 hour a month with one person and probably get the same outcome. Like, it just doesn't take into account all of the complexity of those interactions, and you know, there's just so much more nuance that's required to actually kind of understand. And I understand that that's what we should be justifying in a training package, but there's still far too much calculation involved.
Yeah. Yep. The issues you raise are felt by every single trainer, every single parent, right the way across the country. Can you imagine what would happen if everyone stood up and said, "Stop! I've had enough. I'm angry as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore." Can you imagine what would happen if every single person stood up and had that? Something would have to change within the system. The problem is, I don't believe that there are enough trainers and assessors or RTO managers who are sufficiently educated enough to know that it is their right to do this. This is an industry-based system. They are industry. Vocational trainers in education should declare themselves, we are an industry. You
Mm.
are affecting our industry. How many RTOs are there? 3,500 RTOs. Let's say they've got 2 people working each. That's 7,000 people. Can you imagine 7,000 people standing up and yelling, I am as angry as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore? It is their right. And it says it right the way throughout all the regulations. It's an industry-based system directed by the industry to meet industry needs. It is not meeting the needs of assessors and trainers and RTOs. Now, don't get me wrong. TAFE is a great place. It's a wonderful organisation. It should be being promoted more for those fields in which it is good at.
Mm.
RTOs should not be competing against TAFE.
Well, and certain areas as well, like for
Mm.
example, in some of the regional areas where unless you have a massive supporting structure,
Yeah.
you're just not going to get a lot of little RTOs going to because, it's not viable for the number
Well,
of
that's
students and
that's
things like that.
well,
So I think it's not just like there's obviously certain industry areas, but
yeah,
I think there's certain industry areas, I think there's certain cohorts, and I think there's certain areas where TAFE absolutely has like such a
absolutely.
massive need,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. The reason why TAFE by RTOs can, and you'd recall this because you were there at the start. Sorry to tell the world how old you are, but you were one of the ones at the beginning when the whole idea of RTOs came up. The purpose of an RTO was to put pressure on TAFE. They were to open the market up to training. Now that was a great idea. So a lot of ex-TAFE people jumped out became an RTO, and we basically got two levels of two levels of TAFE now, going with a whole bunch of ex-TAFEs running TAFE type courses. I'm saying get out of that industry, give it back to TAFE. RTOs concentrate on those areas where you're best at. Things like the stuff that you do, helping people understand how to get the best out of their training for their organisation. TAFE should be, in my opinion, it should be a national product, not state by state, because we're such a transient society now. You might get a qualification in one state, you need to move to another state, you can't use it. I created the uh, teacher teaching institute, ATOs. What it is, it's basically this ACT's equivalent of the state teacher registration bodies. Every state had them. ACT was the last one, and I was tasked with creating this. The problem, I went around to every state talking to their people. And they had wonderful advice from all these people, and everyone had different opinions. So if we had a teacher here in the ACT who lived in Canberra but worked, say, in Queanbeyan, which is 5 kilometres down the road, needed 2 sets of registration, got paid under 2 different awards. Queensland was even worse. You had people on the Gold Coast that just had to walk 100 yards from their home, and then suddenly they're in another state. So if I want to do teaching over there and do teaching here,
Mm.
I have to have 2 sets of registration. How dumb is that?
Yeah,
We,
yeah,
we,
it's
we
crazy.
need we need this stuff to be regulated. But if it can't be regulated, it should be flexible enough to say, okay, well, you're fully registered there, partially registered here, but you're all working to the same rules.
Yeah,
Rather
and
than,
just, I mean, recognition across, like, I get that there are certain states that will never subject themselves to harmonization. I fully accept that. WA, Victoria. Um, but at the same time, it's like there's just, it's so counterproductive to the goals that everybody is after, which is more skills,
yeah,
more skilled Australians,
yeah,
and exporting those skills out to the world to ensure the robustness of the Australian economy
yeah,
over the next 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years.
yeah. And
Um,
just one final example on that point from me on on what I consider the stupidity of the system. You look at the training package for trainers and assessors in Australia. Now go and look at the training package that was developed for overseas clients. Two totally different things.
Mm.
Why? If our industry is so strong, it is so robust that we can export it to other countries, why do we need different standards for different countries? If our system is so good, why are we changing it to go somewhere else? Can't be that good, then, can it?
Why does the Defense Force have their own? Why does the Air Force have their own TAE? Why does DFES have their own TAE? Like, why do so many government organizations turn around and go, we're not going to use the national training package?
That's
We're
right.
going to use our own competency standards. I think that's really interesting. Like, it's a valid point.
We,
You know
we,
what
we
I
don't
mean?
use training packages in defence. We don't use training packages. They've tried to lean towards it by calling these things called learning management packages, but it's not a training package. It's fully an identified set of skills and knowledge that enable a person to do their job under particular conditions.
Yeah.
And that's where the focus is. And the assessment at the end of the day, there's summative, normative, summative, formative, and cumulative assessment that says, can you do it individually? Can you do it as part of a team? Can you do it to do your job?
Yeah.
And the outcome is whether or not they can do their job, and then they're qualified. In most cases, unless some school teacher screws it up. But that's right the way back at the start. Go back and watch the first episode, folks, if you want to know more about that one.
All right, guys. So if you want to join Dr. Phil's army, do follow him on LinkedIn. Comment down below, okay?
Yes.
And at some point, Dr. Phil and I will figure out the solution to all of this, and we will, march on the Capitol and demand the change that we all so rightfully deserve. Thank you so much, guys. Seriously do like, subscribe, comment, all of those good things below. It helps us continue to put out all of this content that I certainly enjoy making for you guys. Thank you so much, Phil, for catching up with us. I could probably talk with you for another few hours, but I am conscious I'm due for another meeting. So thank you so much. Guys, my name is Lauren Hollows, NOI Education Services. You can check out Dr. Phil in the links below. Thank you very much, Phil. Have a great day, guys. That's it from us.